recent years in the United States, Europe and across developed and underdeveloped nations of the world, a growing body of research has revealed a troubling reality. 1 in 4 young men between the ages of 18 and 30 report feeling isolated on a regular basis. This statistic is not just a number. It represents millions of individuals who struggle daily with loneliness, disconnection, and a sense of being left behind by a rapidly changing society. The issue of loneliness among young men has become so pronounced that public health experts now compare its effects to the risks of smoking or obesity. The U.S. Surgeon General, in a 2023 advisory, declared loneliness and social isolation a public health epidemic. In Europe, surveys from Eurostat and the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions show that young men are consistently reporting higher levels of disconnection compared to women of the same age group. These findings highlight a shared crisis that transcends national borders, cultural differences, and economic systems. The story behind these numbers is complex. To understand why so many young men feel isolated, it is important to look beyond the surface of individual experiences and examine the larger structures that shape their lives. From economic instability to changes in dating culture, from the influence of social media to persistent mental health stigma, the causes of isolation are interwoven and multifaceted. At the same time, the consequences ripple outward, affecting not only the individuals themselves but also their families, communities, and societies at large. Consider the example of a 22-year-old college student in the U.S. who spends most of his evenings in his dorm room, connected to others only through video games and social media. Despite being connected online, he reports feeling profoundly lonely and unable to build meaningful relationships offline. Or take the case of a 27-year-old in Spain who, despite having a degree, is unemployed and still living at home with his parents. Economic precarity limits his independence, reduces his confidence, and increases his sense of social isolation. These examples illustrate how isolation is not just a private issue but one shaped by broader social and economic realities. This crisis does not only manifest in individual sadness or temporary disconnection. Studies show that persistent loneliness increases the risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and even suicide. In both the U.S., Europe, and other nations of the world, young men account for a disproportionate percentage of suicide cases, often linked to untreated mental health struggles and social isolation. The World Health Organization has highlighted that suicide is one of the leading causes of death among young people globally, and men are significantly more at risk than women. At the same time, the ripple effects of isolation extend beyond health outcomes. Young men who feel disconnected are more likely to withdraw from education, employment, and civic engagement. In some cases, prolonged isolation can fuel resentment and vulnerability to extremist ideologies or toxic online communities. This is not just a matter of individual well-being but a factor that can influence the social and political climate of entire nations. It is important to underline that while the crisis is widespread, it is not evenly distributed. Factors such as socioeconomic status, cultural expectations, and geographic location shape how isolation is experienced. A young man in rural America who struggles to find steady work may experience loneliness differently from a young professional in Berlin who, despite career success, struggles to form deep friendships in a fast-paced urban environment. Still, the underlying theme is the same. Isolation is increasingly becoming a defining feature of early adulthood for many men. The purpose of this exploration is to move beyond the headlines and statistics to uncover the untold numbers and the deeper realities behind them. Why is this happening now, in a time when digital technologies promise more connection than ever before? What cultural and structural shifts are fueling this crisis on both sides of the Atlantic? And most importantly, what can be done to address it? This video on Sieglery will examine the issue of isolation among young men in detail. We will look at the root causes, including economic hardship, housing insecurity, changes in dating and relationships, the impact of social media, and persistent stigma around mental health. We will also discuss the personal and societal consequences of widespread isolation, from declining mental health to broader social fragmentation. Along the way, we will reference recent studies, expert opinions, and real-life examples to create a comprehensive understanding of the crisis. Loneliness in the United States. In the United States, the most recent surveys confirm that isolation is increasingly common among young adults, with men being particularly affected. According to a 2023 survey by the Pew Research Center, about 28% of young men between the ages of 18 and 29 reported feeling lonely most or all of the time. This figure is significantly higher than the same age group of women, where approximately 20% reported the same frequency of loneliness. Other national surveys reinforce this picture. The American Perspective Survey, conducted by the Survey Center on American Life in 2021, found that 15% of men reported having no close friends, compared to only 10% of women. The survey also revealed a decline in the number of young men with 6 or more close friends. In 1990, 55% of men reported such friendships, but by 2021 only 27% did. This decline in male friendships directly correlates with rising reports of isolation. Loneliness in Europe. Across Europe, the picture is strikingly similar, although there are regional variations. Data from Eurostat indicates that about 7% of Europeans report feeling lonely most of the time, but among young men aged 18 to 29, the numbers rise significantly. In countries like the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Germany, national studies show that nearly 1 in 4 young men report frequent loneliness, a figure that mirrors U.S. findings. Loneliness has always been part of the human experience, but in recent years it has taken on a new and troubling shape. Behind closed doors in crowded cities and universities, and even in digital spaces that promise connection, many young men quietly wrestle with a sense of isolation. The numbers reveal what conversations often do not. 1 in 4 young men between the ages of 18 and 30 report feeling chronically isolated. That means millions of lives marked not by dramatic events, but by the quieter pain of disconnection, of scrolling through feeds full of smiling faces while feeling unseen, of sitting in classrooms or offices while feeling apart, of going to bed with no one to talk to about the day. This is not a niche problem. It is a widespread experience that cuts across national borders, educational backgrounds, and social classes. The untold numbers show us not just statistics but the outlines of a silent epidemic. In the United States, surveys by organizations like the Pew Research Center and the American Psychological Association point to steady increases in self-reported loneliness among young men. Across Europe, parallel studies echo the same theme. Many young men are finding it harder than ever to build and sustain meaningful connections. It is a paradox of our age. Never have we had more ways to communicate, and yet so many feel unheard. Understanding this issue begins with recognizing the scale. Imagine walking into a college lecture hall of 100 young men. 25 of them, scattered across the rows, are carrying the weight of loneliness so heavy it shapes their daily lives. Or picture a busy subway train filled with commuters in their 20s. In each crowded car, dozens are silently battling feelings of being cut off, disconnected, left behind. It is this hidden reality that makes the numbers so urgent. But numbers alone cannot tell the whole story. To understand why so many young men feel this way, we must look beyond the data to the forces shaping modern life. This generation is coming of age in a world of economic uncertainty, shifting social norms, and constant digital connection that often fails to translate into real closeness. These forces are not abstract. They are lived daily, shaping how young men form identities, pursue relationships, and imagine their futures. Economic pressures are among the most immediate. For decades, young adulthood has been seen as a time of transition toward independence, leaving the family home, starting careers, building relationships. Yet for many today, these milestones feel out of reach. Housing costs have soared in cities across both the United States and Europe and other developed nations of the world, making it harder to move out and establish independence. Wages, meanwhile, have stagnated compared to the cost of living, leaving young men caught between aspiration and reality. When financial stress dominates, social life often suffers. Invitations are declined, milestones are delayed, and slowly isolation grows. This economic squeeze affects more than bank accounts. It reshapes identity. In cultures that place high value on independence and achievement, being unable to afford one's own place or progress in a career can carry deep feelings of inadequacy. Many young men report that these financial struggles leave them hesitant to pursue relationships or invest in friendships, fearing judgment or rejection. Independence, once a clear marker of adulthood, becomes delayed or uncertain. And with it, the sense of belonging weakens. Alongside financial pressures, the landscape of relationships has shifted dramatically. Romantic life, once shaped by local communities and face-to-face encounters, now often plays out on digital platforms. Dating apps offer opportunities but also bring new frustrations. Many young men describe experiences of constant rejection, superficial interactions, and the pressure of competing in crowded online spaces. Instead of fostering connection, these experiences can intensify feelings of loneliness and inadequacy. Friendships, too, have changed. Cultural norms around masculinity in many societies discourage men from expressing vulnerability or building emotionally deep connections with other men. While women are often socialized to maintain close, supportive friendships, men may find their social ties more fragile, tied to shared activities rather than shared emotions. When romantic or family relationships are absent, this lack of deep friendship can leave young men especially vulnerable to isolation. Layered on top of these changes is the issue of mental health stigma. Even when young men recognize their feelings of loneliness, many hesitate to speak up. Across the United States, Europe, and other nations of the world, traditional ideas of masculinity still carry weight. The expectation to be self-reliant, to endure silently, to avoid appearing weak. As a result, many young men internalize their struggles. They may bottle up emotions, withdraw further, and miss opportunities for support. This silence turns loneliness into a heavier burden. Technology, while offering new forms of connection, often deepens the problem. Online spaces can give the illusion of closeness without its substance. Social media allows young men to maintain hundreds of surface-level connections but leaves them longing for genuine intimacy. Scrolling through feeds filled with images of others' successes and friendships can make their own lives feel emptier by comparison. Online gaming and streaming can provide temporary escape but may replace face-to-face social experiences. In the end, digital life often becomes a substitute for real connection, leaving young men paradoxically both connected and disconnected. Taken together, these forces, economic stress, delayed independence, relationship challenges, mental health stigma, and digital reliance, form the root causes of isolation. None of these factors alone explain the 1 in 4 figure, but together they create an environment where disconnection thrives. The consequences of this isolation ripple deeply into personal lives. Loneliness does not simply mean being alone. It is the subjective feeling of being cut off, of not having enough meaningful relationships, of believing that others are living while you are standing still. For young men, these feelings shape daily experiences in profound ways. Mentally, loneliness often translates into self-doubt and negative thinking. Many young men caught in isolation describe cycles of rumination. Thoughts like, "I'm falling behind," "I don't belong," or "no one wants me around." Over time, these patterns wear down confidence and hope. Anxiety grows around social interactions, making it harder to reach out, which in turn deepens the isolation. Depression often follows, creating a cycle that feels impossible to break. The effects are not only mental but physical. Studies consistently show that chronic loneliness carries health risks comparable to smoking or obesity. Young men who feel isolated often report poor sleep, fatigue, and stress-related symptoms like headaches or digestive issues. Their immune systems may weaken, making them more vulnerable to illness. The body, it turns out, treats loneliness as a form of threat, keeping stress systems activated in ways that harm long-term health. Socially, isolation narrows opportunities. A young man who withdraws misses out on the networks that often provide jobs, housing, or mentorship. He may see peers advancing in careers, relationships, or personal milestones while he remains stuck. The comparison heightens feelings of inadequacy, and over time the gap widens, not only socially but economically and professionally. Emotionally, the absence of close connection leaves a void. Humans are wired for belonging, and without it, meaning itself can feel eroded. Many young men describe life in isolation as a blur of days without significance, lacking in purpose. Even achievements, passing an exam, securing a job interview, feel hollow without someone to share them with. The toll can be most severe when isolation leads to despair. For some, prolonged loneliness contributes to thoughts of self-harm or suicide. Across both the United States and Europe, suicide rates among young men remain disproportionately high compared to women. While multiple factors contribute to this, isolation is a significant one. The lack of connection magnifies pain and convinces many that they have no one to turn to. This is why the untold numbers matter. They are not just figures for academic reports or policy papers. They represent lives at risk of being diminished or cut short. Each percentage point represents thousands of young men grappling silently with disconnection. The hidden cost to society. When young men feel isolated, society bears hidden costs. Healthcare systems face higher burdens due to the physical and mental health effects of loneliness. Economies lose productivity and innovation. Communities weaken as civic participation declines. Families experience strain as they carry emotional and financial responsibilities that might otherwise be shared more broadly. Perhaps most importantly, isolation limits the potential of a generation. Young adulthood is meant to be a time of building careers, families, communities, and personal identities. When so many young men are disconnected, entire societies miss out on their contributions, creativity, and leadership. The societal impact of young men's isolation is wide-ranging and profound. It shapes families, communities, economies, politics, and culture. What may begin as one individual's private struggle ultimately echoes outward, influencing the collective health and vitality of nations. Recognizing these impacts highlights why solutions cannot be left solely to individuals. Addressing isolation requires coordinated effort, from families, communities, policymakers, and cultural leaders. Only then can societies unlock the potential of young men who today feel disconnected but who tomorrow could play central roles in shaping a stronger, more connected future. Stories and voices. Statistics can reveal the scale of isolation, but they cannot capture the quiet moments where loneliness takes shape. To truly understand why 1 in 4 young men feel disconnected, it helps to look at the lived experiences behind the numbers. While every story is unique, common threads appear. Stories of delayed independence, struggles with relationships, economic pressures, and the silent battles with mental health. Let us examine the below instances. The young professional feeling stuck. Consider the story of a 26-year-old who has done everything right. He earned a degree, found an entry-level job, and relocated to a city for better opportunities. On paper, he is moving forward. Yet beneath the surface, he feels adrift. The cost of rent consumes most of his paycheck, leaving little for social activities. Friendships from college have faded, and building new ones in a competitive city feels daunting. Dating apps bring more rejection than connection. Most nights he retreats into streaming shows or gaming to pass the time. For him, isolation is not about being physically alone. He is surrounded by people every day. It is about the absence of belonging. Without strong friendships or community ties, he wonders if he is truly building a life or just surviving day by day. The son who never left home. In another example, a 23-year-old still lives in his childhood bedroom. Economic pressures and limited job prospects have delayed his plans to move out. He helps around the house, contributes a small share of his income, and tells himself it is only temporary. Yet, as months turn into years, a sense of inadequacy grows. Seeing peers post pictures of new apartments, vacations, or engagements on social media intensifies his self-doubt. He avoids social gatherings because he fears the inevitable questions about his progress in life. Isolation for him is compounded by shame. Living with family provides shelter, but it also magnifies the sense of being left behind. Without spaces to grow independently, he struggles to develop the confidence that comes with self-sufficiency. The quiet friend losing connection. There is also the story of the young man who once had a tight-knit group of friends. In high school they were inseparable. But over the years paths diverged. Some moved away for college or work, others settled into relationships, and a few started families early. At 28, he realizes that he rarely speaks to those who once knew him best. Text messages go unanswered, group chats have gone silent, and invitations no longer arrive. He wonders if it is his fault. Did he drift away or did they simply forget about him? This kind of social isolation is subtle but powerful. It is not dramatic or sudden but a slow fading of bonds. For him, loneliness feels like standing still while the rest of the world keeps moving. The worker in transition. Another voice comes from the young man navigating unstable work. Gig jobs, temporary contracts, or underemployment make him feel disposable. Without a stable workplace, he struggles to build lasting relationships with colleagues. Every few months he starts over somewhere new. The constant instability leaves little room for planning the future. Friendships are hard to maintain when schedules are unpredictable and financial insecurity weighs heavily. In moments of downtime he feels invisible. neither fully part of the workforce nor fully part of a community. For him, isolation is tied to uncertainty. Without a sense of stability, building meaningful connections feels out of reach. The hidden mental health struggle. Perhaps the most invisible story is that of the young man who seems fine on the outside. He laughs with acquaintances, posts online occasionally, and goes about daily routines. Yet internally he battles waves of loneliness and self-doubt. He rarely talks about these feelings. Cultural expectations around strength and independence convince him that admitting loneliness would be a weakness. Instead, he withdraws quietly, spending long hours scrolling on his phone or distracting himself with work. This silent struggle highlights how isolation often remains hidden. Without open conversations, many young men suffer in silence, never revealing the depth of their disconnection until it becomes overwhelming. The online seeker of belonging. For some, the digital world becomes both refuge and trap. A 21-year-old, for example, spends hours in online gaming communities where he feels a sense of belonging he cannot find offline. The shared jokes, achievements, and camaraderie provide comfort. But when the screen turns off, reality sets back in. His offline life remains empty. Few close friends nearby, no strong community ties, and limited opportunities for in-person connection. The digital connections are real but fragile, unable to replace the richness of face-to-face relationships. For him, the paradox of connection without closeness defines isolation. The internet provides a lifeline, but it cannot fully fill the void. Yet it is not only individuals who suffer. The effects of widespread isolation ripple outward into communities and societies. When large numbers of young men feel cut off, the impact can be felt in workplaces, neighborhoods, and even political systems. Communities lose potential volunteers, innovators, and leaders when isolation sidelines a generation. Economies lose productivity when young men disengage. Societies lose cohesion when citizens feel disconnected from one another. Isolation among young men also influences cultural dynamics. Disconnected individuals are more vulnerable to unhealthy coping mechanisms, from substance use to online radicalization. Without supportive networks, young men may seek belonging in spaces that exploit their loneliness, whether through extremist ideologies or toxic online communities. The personal toll thus transforms into a broader societal risk. At the same time, the persistence of this issue challenges traditional narratives of masculinity. If 1 in 4 young men feels isolated, it suggests that prevailing cultural expectations are failing to support them. The silence around loneliness is not a mark of resilience but of neglect. Addressing it requires reimagining what it means to be strong, successful, and connected in today's world. The challenge of isolation among young men is complex, but it is not insurmountable. While the roots are deep, solutions can be found at many levels: personal, familial, community-based, and societal. Each layer of action strengthens the others, weaving a web of connection that can reduce disconnection and rebuild belonging. At the personal level, change often begins with small steps. For a young man feeling cut off, joining a sports club, volunteering for a community project, or attending regular meetups may seem like minor choices, yet they provide opportunities for repeated contact with others. Over time, these small encounters form the foundation of trust and friendship. Habits of reaching out, however modest, slowly counteract the inertia of loneliness. Another important step is balancing digital and offline life. Online spaces can provide entertainment and even some degree of community, but they should not supplement face-to-face connection. A conscious effort to limit excessive scrolling or gaming, and instead prioritize shared meals, conversations, or outdoor activities, restores the depth of human interaction that screens often lack. Personal well-being also requires attention. Recognizing early signs of loneliness, such as withdrawal, lack of motivation, or fatigue, can help young men seek support before disconnection deepens. Counseling, peer groups, or mental health resources provide valuable tools, but they require the first step of openness. Reframing success also matters. Instead of constantly comparing achievements, focusing on personal growth and meaning can reduce the sense of falling behind and restore confidence. Families and close relationships are another critical layer. Too often, silence surrounds young men's struggles. By encouraging open dialogue, families create safe spaces where emotions are acknowledged rather than hidden. Parents and siblings who ask, listen, and respond without judgment make it easier for young men to share what they are going through. For those still living at home, fostering gradual independence is key. Encouraging responsibility, whether managing finances, contributing to household decisions, or pursuing skills, helps young men build confidence while still benefiting from family support. Families can also recognize the importance of male friendships. Encouraging sons, brothers, or partners to spend time with friends helps normalize relationships that may otherwise be undervalued. Communities and institutions play perhaps the most visible role in reducing isolation. Community centers, sports leagues, cultural organizations, and local clubs provide environments where young men can meet peers and feel part of something larger. These spaces must be accessible, both physically and financially, so that economic barriers do not block participation. Schools and universities too can make a difference. Beyond academics, these institutions can provide mentorship programs, student groups, and counseling services that foster belonging. For many young men, higher education is a critical transition, and ensuring they have networks of support during this stage can prevent disconnection. Workplaces also matter. Employers who create team-building opportunities, encourage work-life balance, and provide mental health resources help young men feel valued not just as workers but as people. At the societal level, structural changes are needed to address the roots of isolation. Affordable housing initiatives, fair wages, and stable employment opportunities reduce the economic stress that delays independence and fuels disconnection. Expanding access to affordable mental health services ensures that young men do not have to suffer in silence. Public campaigns can also play a role, normalizing discussions around loneliness in the same way that past campaigns have changed attitudes toward mental health or physical fitness. Supporting community initiatives through funding and policy is equally important. Investments in local sports programs, arts initiatives, and neighborhood events create spaces for connection that benefit everyone, including young men. The more opportunities there are to meet, share, and belong, the less room there is for isolation to take root. Perhaps the deepest solutions, however, require cultural change. For generations, masculinity has been defined in narrow terms: strength, independence, stoicism. These traits are not inherently harmful, but when taken as absolutes, they discourage vulnerability and connection. Redefining masculinity to include openness, care, and collaboration removes barriers that keep young men silent about their struggles. Shifting cultural priorities also means revaluing relationships as markers of success. Careers and material achievements matter, but they cannot replace the sense of belonging that comes from supportive friendships and communities. When society places as much value on kindness, resilience, and connection as it does on wealth or status, young men gain permission to pursue lives that are both successful and fulfilling. Ultimately, addressing the isolation of young men is not just an individual task. It is a collective responsibility. Every level of society has a role to play. Individuals can reach out and build habits of connection. Families can encourage dialogue and independence. Communities can provide accessible spaces for belonging. Societies can enact policies that support stability and inclusion. When these efforts align, the silent epidemic begins to lose its hold. Fewer young men slip through the cracks. More feel seen, heard, and valued. And the benefits ripple outward, strengthening families, workplaces, and neighborhoods. Isolation does not need to define this generation. Though the statistics paint a sobering picture, they also reveal an opportunity. By understanding and addressing the forces that create disconnection, we can build a world where young men thrive. The awareness that 1 in 4 young men feels isolated should not be a number we accept. It should be a turning point. For too long, loneliness has been treated as a private weakness rather than a public issue. But its scale shows us otherwise. Just as societies have tackled mental health stigma, workplace inequality, and public health crises, so too must we now confront loneliness with seriousness and urgency. What makes this especially important is that isolation left unchecked does not simply fade. It expands. It shapes mental health, erodes trust, and limits opportunities. The cost is measured not only in individual suffering but in lost potential for communities and societies. Addressing it now ensures healthier futures, not only for young men but for everyone around them. And while this discussion centers on young men, the truth is that loneliness is a shared human thread. Everyone encounters it at some point. What makes young men's experience unique is the silence that often surrounds it. the cultural expectation to endure without complaint. Breaking that silence is not just an act of support for men, but a step toward a more compassionate society. When young men are connected and supported, they contribute more fully to their families, workplaces, and communities. Their well-being strengthens the bonds that hold societies together. The cost of neglecting this issue is high, but the reward for addressing it is greater still. So what does moving forward look like? For the young man feeling isolated, it may mean reaching out, sending a message, joining a group, or seeking help. For family and friends, it may mean checking in, listening, or simply showing up. For communities, it may mean creating spaces where belonging is possible. And for policymakers, it may mean enacting measures that make stability and support accessible to all. The untold numbers remind us of a basic truth. Connection is not a luxury but a necessity. Without it, even the brightest achievements feel empty. With it, even small victories carry meaning. The value of connection cannot be measured in statistics alone, but in the difference it makes in daily lives. The laugh shared with a friend, the mentor who believes, the community that welcomes. As we consider the reality that 1 in 4 young men feels isolated, the choice before us is simple. We can ignore the silence and allow disconnection to spread, or we can confront it with awareness, empathy, and action. Each statistic represents an opportunity to build a bridge, to replace isolation with belonging. The untold numbers are more than data points. They are a call to notice, to listen, and to act. They challenge us to create a society where fewer young men walk alone, unseen, and unheard. The real question is not whether we can afford to act, is whether we can afford not to. Because behind the numbers are lives full of potential. And every life connected, every young man seen and supported, is not only a personal victory but a collective one. Together we can turn isolation into connection, silence into conversation, and loneliness into belonging. This silent struggle highlights how isolation often remains hidden. Without open conversations, many young men suffer in silence, never revealing the depth of their disconnection until it becomes overwhelming. The online seeker of belonging. For some, the digital world becomes both refuge and trap. A 21-year-old, for example, spends hours in online gaming communities where he feels a sense of belonging he cannot find offline. The shared jokes, achievements, and camaraderie provide comfort. But when the screen turns off, reality sets back in. His offline life remains empty. Few close friends nearby, no strong community ties, and limited opportunities for in-person connection. The digital connections are real but fragile, unable to replace the richness of face-to-face relationships. For him, the paradox of connection without closeness defines isolation. The internet provides a lifeline, but it cannot fully fill the void. This isn't just about young men, it's about all of us. Loneliness affects entire communities, families, and societies. By breaking the silence and confronting the stigma, we can move from isolation to belonging, and from silence to conversation. If you've ever felt alone, disconnected, or pressured by expectations, this video will resonate deeply. And if you know someone who might be struggling in silence, share this with them. It could make a difference. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Seaglery for more thought-provoking topics that matter. Join the conversation. Why do you think loneliness has become such a widespread issue for young men today? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective.